Hey everybody, Chris here with a video on required minimum distributions. Recording this on January 23rd, 2024, so all information is hopefully accurate as of today. Please always fact check me. I encourage that. I have to fact check myself and everything I see. And it'll pertain to years 2024 forward. But in describing that, I think I need to also take a step back to remind us where rules have been. What have the past rules been? What are the current rules? What are some changes going forward? So we'll do that. We'll also talk about how it can get confusing, right? And then we'll talk about some charitable contributions with your IRA, some what I'll call an RMD trap, where you can get unintended consequences on distributions or delaying distributions more specifically. The timing of these things, aggregation, and how they work with annuities. But first, let's run some disclaimers, and then we'll come back and get into things. All right, so let's start with a little bit of a background on this. It's not lengthy, so shouldn't be terribly lengthy here. But if you recall, for so many years, required distributions began at age 70 and a half. If you recall, we were all coached. Put money into your IRA, your 401k, don't touch it till you're 59 and a half. Then you have to start taking it up by age 70 and a half. Well, in 2020, they changed that to age 72, and now it's at age 73. And in 2025, not progressive, just wait, and in 2025, in year 2033, it's age 75. So for 2023 until 2032, it's age 73. Look, all this can change. But I'm just distinguishing between a gradual approach. This is just a cut and dry. Hey, in 2033, you don't need to be, you can wait until you're age 75. But for now and for the foreseeable future, it's age 73. But I thought that was important to distinguish because for so long it had been age 70 and a half, right? So those are the current rules. You have to take out money from your IRA beginning at those ages. Now, how much do you have to take out? Let's talk about the calculation and the timing and what I call aggregation. So this pertains to, this will pertain to IRAs first. We'll talk about 401ks in a little bit. But for your IRAs, wherever your IRA is, and you might have multiple, you have to use a certain table. And the most common table to use is the Uniform Life Table. It's Table 3. IRS Publication 590B is the go-to document for IRA distributions. So I'll cite and I'll reference Publication 590B throughout this presentation. But how you calculate your required distribution is your prior year-end balance or balances. So December 31st, 2023, look at your IRA or all of your IRAs. Then you have to divide that by a factor in that Uniform Life Table 3 by the IRS. We'll show you that in a little bit. And then that's your required minimum distribution for the year. Now, the rule is you have to take it out by the end of the year. You can take it out December 31st, although I don't encourage that because there's processing times, delays, and there's all sorts of things that happen towards the end of the year that you might mess up. But the point is, it just has to be taken at some point throughout the year. So if your required distribution is $50,000, you can take $50,000 today, $50,000 at the end of the year, or you can do the math, like $4,833, something like that. You can do a monthly distribution. It doesn't matter when you take it, just have it out by the end of the year. The aggregation is, say you have, we'll just say you have 5 IRAs, because you have them at different firms or different investment strategies at one firm. And using that $50,000 required distribution, for example, let's say each IRA has an equal amount. Just ironically, coincidentally, they all have the same amount of money in it at the end of last year. And each IRA has a $10,000 required distribution. As long as it's an IRA, not considering 401k plans, as long as it's an IRA, you can aggregate those amounts together and then take the distribution out of any one or any number of them that you want. So $50,000 total distribution, if it's $10,000 precisely from each account, you could take $10,000 out of three, $12,000 out of the other, $18,000 out of the last one, or $8,000 out of the last one. You could take all 50 out of one. You could take 40 out of one, 10 out of another, and not the other three. So it's not on an account-by-account basis with IRAs. It's in aggregate, and then you can break up those distributions from any one or ones that you want. Just make sure you get out the required minimum distribution. So that's the current rules, the aggregation, and the timing. Now, when it gets confusing is if it's not your IRA, meaning you've inherited it, and you've inherited it from someone who's not your spouse, or if you have a spouse who is more than 10 years younger than you, you will not be using the uniform table that so many people use. I mean, it's not common, although the cases do exist. Just understand that if you've inherited an IRA, you may be subject to a different table. If you own an IRA and your spouse is younger than you by 10 years and they're your beneficiary, there's going to be a different table. So it can get confusing at some point, but once you know what table to use, it's reasonably easy at that point. So if you've inherited an IRA from your spouse, you use the standard Uniform Life Table, Table 3. And let's give you a little bit of a look at where I go for this. Essentially, you just go to the IRS website and you look for publication 590B, distribution from individual retirement arrangements, right? And you can have it in HTML format, or you can have it in PDF. I like to download PDFs a lot. It's just easier for me to read. But this is where to go to find the table and the factors. So if you've inherited an IRA, the hardest part, or I guess the most calculations done upon inheritance, which table will you be subject to? Because again, once you know what table you're subject to, it's reasonably easy to do the calculation each year. And plus, wherever your IRA is, all of our companies have the computer systems that keep track of this. I find the most work is in just deciding when to take it. People take their distributions for property taxes in the spring, for vacations in the summer, for gifting in the fall. For regular living expenses, people tend to take it on a monthly basis systematically. But just know that if you've inherited an IRA and you've inherited from someone who's not your spouse, then you fall into different beneficiary designations, and it's going to dictate the amount and timing of those distributions. So buzzwords are designated beneficiaries and eligible designated beneficiaries. In the most, what's becoming more of a common instance, something that it's not always subject to the table. It's if you inherit an IRA from someone who's not your spouse, who was more than 10 years older than you. Now, who would that be? Most commonly, I see it being adult children. Adult children whose parents have passed and they inherit the IRA. Now, they'll be 10 years younger than their parents, more than 10 years younger than their parents, and they'll be subject to what's called the 10-year rule. And that's kind of the most onerous distribution in that you only have 10 years to take out the entire balance instead of one of these distribution tables which gives you factors that pertain to actuarial life expectancy things. So if you are an adult child and you've inherited an IRA from your parents, you have got to distribute those funds by the end of the 10th year of their passing. So we're in 2024. If you inherit an IRA from your mom or dad this year, you have to distribute all the funds by the end of 2034. Now, it could be, you can take it all right now when you inherit it. You can wait until the very last moment, or you can take things along the way. those are the current rules, that you just have to distribute it over a 10-year period versus your life expectancy. And then you just have to think about your tax bracket, maybe some tax planning if it's a larger IRA, and just spread those payments out so that you're not cashing it all in at once and kind of creating a huge tax bill unnecessarily, unless it is necessary for you to cash it in. So it can get, when it gets confusing is when you've inherited an IRA, and typically the confusion's just upon inheritance and what table to use. But once you know what table to use and what schedule to use, then going forward it's a little bit easier. And in all instances, you can always take more than is required. You can take less, but if you take less, there's a penalty. So in the case of taking more, there's no penalty for taking more. There is a penalty for taking less. And in all instances, all distributions from IRAs are taxable at your tax rate, and that's why some tax planning is involved too. So I thought that would be kind of important to talk about. So interesting now, we have these things called qualified charitable distributions, and let's get those up here. Where did I put those? Qualified charitable distributions are generally non-taxable distributions, or a non-taxable distribution made directly by the trustee of your IRA. That's just the company wherever you have your mutual funds or stocks or bonds. Other than a SEP or simple, right? So your regular IRA, rollover IRA, contributory IRA, just not your SEP or simple, because those are employer plans. To an eligible institution, think 501c3. Most nonprofits, most churches, all right? They have to be eligible to receive tax-deductible contributions. So 501c3 is the most common, or nonprofit structure. That's why I cite it, though others may exist. And you have to be at least age 70 and a half to do this. Although required distributions start at age 73, you can do this as soon as age 70 and a half. And then the kicker here is these qualified distributions count. Contributions to charities count towards your required minimum distribution. And I'll tell you why that's such a big deal. See right here, up to $100,000 a year. The maximum annual exclusion for QCDs is $100,000. So you can do up to $100,000 a year. And if you're married, your spouse, look at that. If you file a joint return, your spouse can also contribute up to $100,000 a year. It's $200,000 per couple. So let me just explain how that is helpful is, clear some of this. How that's helpful is if you have a larger required distribution. In the past, many people were able to itemize their deductions, right? You would itemize your charitable contributions because the itemized deductions were greater than the standard deduction. Well, now, the standard deduction for people over 65, a couple married filing jointly, is about $30,000 a year. So take an example whereby if your required distribution is $50,000, and let's say, how can you really get bang for the buck? The bang for the buck is if you contribute more than your standard deduction to the charity. So standard deduction for married filing jointly, $30,000. Let's say your required distribution is 50, and just to make this interesting, you want to contribute $45,000 to your charity. So your required minimum distribution is 50. You want to give 45 to the charity. So instead of bringing that all 50 right to you, and now you have 50,000 of income and a $45,000 itemized deduction, you would send $45,000 to the charity, bring $5,000 of income to you, and you still have your $30,000 standard deduction. Now, if you can't follow that, I understand. It's probably tricky hearing the first time through. But the value of this qualified charitable distribution is that the money you donate to the charity is not taxable to you. It doesn't come through your income statement. It stays away from your income statement so that it doesn't impact your tax rate or your Medicare premiums. So it's just super helpful that this money is paid directly from your IRA to the charity, never hits your 1040 tax return as for on a taxable income basis where then you have to make a deduction. So it does not increase your gross income, and that's what's super helpful about donating directly to the charity. And then for many of you, you'll be able to continue to take your standard deduction of $30,000 and get full bang for the buck for the standard deduction and the qualified charitable distribution. So that's what's really helpful about these QCDs. Now, if you're still, something I forgot to mention there, if you're still working, right? So if you have a 401k at work and you're age 73, you may or may not have to take you may or may not have to take a required distribution. So easier to say when you have to take one, right? You'll have to take a required minimum distribution if you're working, you have a 401k, and you're more than a 5% owner of the company you're working at. Also, if you're working and you have a 401k that you're no longer at a company you're no longer working for, where you're no longer working, you need to take a required distribution from there, just like an IRA. So that is when you have to take one. You're more than a 5% owner, or you have a 401k at a company where you no longer work. Now, if you're over age 73, you're still working at a company, it's a huge company where you're nowhere close to a 5% owner, you may not have to take a distribution. It's subject to the rules of that particular 401k plan, and the plans are written differently for different reasons. So you have to call your employer, get in touch with someone who knows about the plan. Typically, the plan administrator will let you know if you need to take a required distribution or not. But just know that if you're over age 73 and you're working, you may or may not have to take a required distribution from that 401k plan where you're still working. You kind of have to look into it for a little bit. But all the meantime, you do still have to take distributions from your IRA or your IRAs. Oh, and further, the 401k plans cannot be aggregated with IRAs. So if you have those, say instead of 5 IRAs as I started out with, whose distributions are all $10,000, let's say you have 4 IRAs and 1 401k, and the 401k's required distribution is $10,000. You cannot take out from your IRA to satisfy your 401k, or take out from your 401k to satisfy your IRA. So you'd have a calculation for 4 IRAs, and you have a calculation for 1 401k, and you can't intermingle those or aggregate them, as I say, as you can with your IRAs. So that's something to know if you do have 401ks out there. They have to, the distribution has to be satisfied from the account itself. It can't be aggregated. So you may want to work towards consolidating all of your IRAs or just getting them out of the 401k structure. All right, lastly, some RMD traps. Let me get up a spreadsheet to kind of illustrate this particular concern, and it's mostly a concern with larger IRAs, whereby you don't want to take out money and pay taxes until you have to. However, the trap is that by the time you have to take out money and pay taxes, you might be in a higher tax bracket. I mean, I'm seeing this a lot whereby folks with larger IRAs, let's just use a $3 million IRA, and keep in mind, even if this money, if you're 68 and this is in your 401k plan and you haven't retired yet, this pertains to you too. So if you have a larger 401k or IRA, larger in this instance is $3 million or more, I mean, you could run into this situation at a $2 million rate, but I'm going to model a $3 million example just to help prove my point. Now, let's say you're 65 with a $3 million IRA, and we expect to earn 5% a year going forward until you're 73. All right? So the math, compounding, 3 million at 5% a year for, about 8 years, you may have a balance of 4.4 million in there That again, this is a 5% rate, so you may or may not, but go with me here. You might have 4.4 million in there, whereby your required distribution at that point is going to be $167,000. And if you're to frame this concept, if you're married, if you're single, this may still apply, but it's a better case study when you're married filing jointly for your taxes, because when you are this is a better case study when you're married filing jointly for your taxes, because when you are married filing jointly, if you have a $167,000 IRA distribution, you are going to fall, so here's your IRA, 167, and that will at least put you in a 22% tax bracket. If you have other income, 167 doesn't take much to get above this 190, which then puts you into a 24% tax bracket. Now, from 22 to 24%, not a big deal. But the problem here is all that money's bottled up. We're only here for a limited amount of time. And if a spouse inherits a large IRA, and now the distribution is still $167,000 or in that ballpark, now they're instantly at the 24% tax bracket, where they were at 22 when you were married, still at a 22%. And then, so now your surviving spouse is single, probably have other, if your IRA distribution is 167, probably have other income, so more than likely, there's a chance they'll be in a 32% tax bracket. So for larger IRAs, I just caution about this tax trap you might find yourself into. And so it speaks to a few things. And what I suggest then is that let's avoid that trap, or let's say tax rates go up in the future. Let's start taking some monies out, or sooner than your required beginning date, your required minimum distribution age, just to help reduce that future distribution. So let's say you can take out $100,000 from your IRA without going into the next tax bracket. Now, as long as the money you take out of an IRA is not part of a required distribution, you can convert it to a Roth IRA. So here you can start converting this $100,000 to a Roth IRA. Yes, you pay taxes on the distribution, but your tax rate, as long as you don't go over a tax rate now that you might be in later, right? You just have to do the analysis to make sure you don't pay more in taxes at any point here, whether you take money now or later. And now we earn the 5%, take out $100,000 a year. I have to redo the equation. Now, instead of $167,000 distribution in the future, you're forced to take $134,000, and you've had the opportunity, hopefully you've taken advantage of it, or it was possible. You could have converted these monies to a Roth. Yes or no, cross that bridge when you get there if that's possible or feasible. But now your forced distribution later is a little bit less, may not put you over the next tax threshold for income taxes or for Medicare premiums. There's definitely merit to this analysis. I mean, it may not work for you, but it's at least worth considering. And again, I really think the bang for the buck is if you can put these monies into a Roth during that. Now, real quick, just to touch on it, well, Chris, why don't we convert it all to a Roth and just put this thing to rest? Well, whenever you convert money to a Roth IRA, you pay taxes on the gross distribution from your IRA. So $3 million all at once puts you in some of the higher tax brackets. And so that's instantly defeats that purpose, right? Instantly defeats that idea. So to do it systematically can make sense. To do it all at once doesn't seem to make terrible sense to me. But the goal was that don't let these monies bottle up so much that now when you have a forced distribution, it's so much more than You expect it, you want it, it's going to give you a tax headache then. I just ask that you're a little bit proactive now in thinking about those future distributions. Something else too here, just one last thing to note, are annuities. Annuities can run into a peculiar calculation. Your annuity will have a cash value, just like your mutual funds, your stocks, and your bonds, right? And this is an annuity inside an IRA. So not an annuity with non-qualified money. This is an annuity that you used your IRA to buy. And what you'll do is, I'll just bring up this Excel spreadsheet with these RMD thing again. But you'll have a cash value, and then you'll have something called a net present value or entire interest, and it's a calculation because of if you have a rider. So if you have like a living benefit or a withdrawal rider, you'll more than likely see this. If you don't have these riders, you're probably not going to be subject to what I'm about to illustrate here. But you could have, let's see here. You could have a cash value of, I got to throw some numbers out here just to make it happen. You put $500,000 into an annuity, and now you have a cash value of $600,000. But you've been making withdrawals, right? You had a cash value of $500,000. You've been making withdrawals. And, all right, so you put in $500,000. It got as high as $750,000. You started making withdrawals, and now it's at $600,000. Well, you made those withdrawals subject to some sort of rider or living benefit that you have, and it's all good things. But let's say then your net present value is higher than your cash value. And so I'm going to put RMD here because you might have some sort of benefit that's paying you $40,000 a year. This is all hypothetical. Your RMD is based on, now let's get down now. We got to get you down to 75. Move that down to 73. So you're in, yeah, okay. Well, you bought it when you're 70. Let's just say you bought it when you're 70. Okay, whatever. So that doesn't matter when you bought it. So your net present value, your RMD is based upon your net present value. So there is a chance that if you have an annuity, and I typically see this in the variables, fixed index, this can happen too. Your RMD is going to be based upon a number that's higher than the actual value of your account. It's called the net present value or entire interest, and it's because you have this rider. So you have some rider that's paying you a guaranteed amount of money a year. This is just an example on the screen, but if you have a rider that's paying you a guaranteed amount of money, that's when you'll be subject to this. And so your RMD is not based upon the cash value. It's based upon the net present value or entire interest. The insurance company has to tell you this number. You can't figure it out on your own. You've got to call them and ask what your required distribution is. You can't just go, putting this $600,000 cash value against the table. It might work out that that's the case, but more than likely there's a little bit of an adjustment or something whereby I should leave that there. Instead of your RMD being a cash value calculation of $22,641, it's based upon the net present value of $750, which is $28,301. So your RMD is actually $5,600 higher than maybe you would have thought, right? So no big deal, just things to be aware of. And more than likely it's because you have one of these living benefit riders. Then if I can, just to go on about it, this living benefit rider of $40,000, well, that's $11,698 more than your required distribution. So I often encourage people to take more if they're receiving it from a rider or from some sort of benefit. You can use this $11,698 in this example. You can carry it over to other IRAs if this is your only IRA. I would still encourage you to take it because I know how these annuities work, and this is not an annuity video, but there's a lot of benefits. There's a lot of good that can come from having those living benefit riders. And so even if they're more than your required distribution, you may want to consider taking the amount subject to the rider versus just your RMD because it can do you favors. And I don't want to cross the line and make this an investment video because then that's a pain in the neck to get through compliance. But annuity IRA monies can be aggregated, and the overage from one annuity IRA can be then subtracted from your non-annuity IRA in that aggregation schematic I described earlier. But the gist here, the reason for mentioning all this is annuity RMD calculations, if you've bought your annuity with your IRA monies, it might be a little bit different than just cash value against the factor. There's something called a net present value. The goal here is to make you aware of this and share that it can be helpful to you if used properly. So that's another facet of these distributions to be considered. So I hope you found this helpful. Again, it's publication 590. I'll put a link, 590B. I'll put a link in the description to that. That is the rule book for these IRA distributions. If you have any questions, you have to read the rule book. And it's not easy to read, but that's the document I look to more so than the internet for finding out these answers because everyone on the internet is just using those rule books, and I can read it as well as anybody. So I hope this was helpful. Hope you understand your required minimum distribution. I hope you understand your required minimum distribution a little bit better. Thanks for watching. See you back here at some point.